So I want to welcome you to Starting a Nonprofit. We have Ramesh Advani. He is our SCORE mentor for the Boston chapter. He has many skill sets, nonprofits among them. But as we get started, I definitely want to go through with you the things that SCORE has to offer to make sure you're taking advantage of all the things that we have. As you may know, our goal is to share small business information with you, and we do that in a couple different ways. One is through our website, score.org. Lots of great information there, templates you can download, blogs, podcasts, previously recorded webinars, lots of great information to dig through and look for. The other way we share information is through the workshops and webinars. We share those on our social media, newsletters, and they are also listed on our website. The most important way that we share small business information is through our mentoring. And our mentors are volunteers. They have many different skill sets and experiences that they want to share with you. We work with folks that are in at any stage of the game, whether you're trying to decide if small business is right for you, if you're in the planning phase, if you're already in business, growing your business, or exiting your business. There's never a wrong time to get a SCORE mentor. A beginning session, they're going to want to learn about you, what your goals are, what your challenges are, and they're going to work with you to come up with a plan so that you can keep moving forward. It's not uncommon that other mentors will be invited to co-mentor or you'll be referred to other mentors as your questions change and your needs grow. And they're always there to help you and find solutions for you so that you can be successful. So the natural next question is how do I get a mentor if I don't already have one? There are actually multiple different ways on the score.org website. I think the easiest is the let us do the matching for you. You put in your zip code, that matches you to the chapter that's nearest you. It will open up a registration form. There's a couple of quick questions that we want to, because we want to know like what your business is and how a mentor can help you at this time. And that will allow us to match you to the most appropriate person to assist you. So we do anticipate a pretty decent number of attendees today. So I will be taking questions for the presenter through the Q&A tab. It's just easier to keep track of questions because chat can kind of get bogged down with a lot of other things. So if you have a question for the presenter along the way, please put it into Q&A and we will get those questions asked at the appropriate moment. We are recording, and that recording will be posted on the score.org/Boston website. You're just, according to the graphic there, as you can see, you're just going to look under the blue bar, local workshops, and you'll find previously recorded webinars. Give me 24 to 48 hours to get that posted, but that's where you'll find it. We won't necessarily be sending out the slides. We will just be having the recording posted so that you can rewatch today's presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Ramesh to take over and share his slides.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time and coming to our webinar. I know it's the lunch hour, so hopefully you will be able to grab a bite to eat while I'm doing this or even after. And as Teresa said, I do not have many complicated slides, so we will pause between a couple of slides for each important points that I make over there, so that if there are any questions, I will be able to hopefully answer them. This particular webinar is things that we'd like people to think about before you get started on a nonprofit, which is a little different from normal workshops where we, teach different business skills or follow up with people. The nonprofit world is very different from the for-profit world. And you will see here, there are two names mentioned here. Sam, who is my colleague, he's a SCORE mentor. As a follow-up to this webinar, we have another introductory webinar that focuses specifically on fundraising and grants. And Sam is going to be conducting that after this one, and I think you should be able to find information on when that'll happen, from our website. So I'm going to get started, and what we're going to do is go through what is a nonprofit, how is it different, and how is it the same
Hey,
as a for.
Ramesh, your slides aren't showing. You must have not hit the share.
Oh, apologies.
No, no problem.
Um,
Now we see it. Thank you so much.
okay, my apologies, everybody. Let me go back one slide. This was my opening starter slide. I said there was another gentleman, Sam Solomon, who will do another introductory type of a webinar that focuses specifically on one aspect, and that is on fundraising and grants. So I just want to mention that. Okay, so you've seen the introductions. We're going to talk about what is a nonprofit, how is it different, and how is it the same as a for-profit, and what are some of the musts that you must keep in mind for a, an organization that is a publicly funded organization. If you set up a nonprofit with just your own funds and don't ask anybody for any funds, um, then that's a different ballgame. But generally, a nonprofit registers with the government to be a publicly funded organization. I'm going to spend a little time talking about some key roles in the nonprofit, and also about money, which is probably one of the most difficult things that uh, all nonprofits have to do throughout their entire existence. And a little bit additional points from a management standpoint, competition and collaboration, something about your strengths and gaps, etc. So this sort of tells you it's not a heavy lift following through what I'm going to share here. We're going to skip this. We used to do this webinar. We used to be an in-person thing where we went around the room and asked people for, their names and their backgrounds, etc. So we'll skip this one. My background. I have a background in the nonprofit sector as well as in the for-profit sector. And within SCORE, we have practice groups, and we have a nonprofit practice group where there are mentors like me who specifically can help and focus on helping those of you who want to set up a nonprofit and or manage a nonprofit, et cetera, et cetera. So what is a nonprofit? A very common acronym is an NPO. An NPO is a nonprofit, and they call it by different names. They call it a non-business entity, a nonprofit institution. It's a legally organized and operated for a specific social benefit, public benefit, or a collective. And there are many, many different categories of nonprofits. Hospitals are nonprofits. Educational institutions are nonprofits. But I think what SCORE does is helps people like yourself who are specific about offering and pursuing a mission that provides a social benefit to either a region, to the country, or to a community, et cetera, et cetera. Churches and religious institutions are also nonprofits. So the main thing you have to remember about a nonprofit is the tax system calls it a non-distribution constraint. What that means is every organization has expenses and the revenues that you generate to cover those expenses, whether the revenues are coming through fundraising or through services, anything that exceeds the expenses, those funds have to be committed to the organization's purpose. You can grow the organization, you can reinvest that in the organization, but you cannot distribute the excess revenues to a private party. So each of you as an individual, you and I, we are as individuals, we are private parties, and you cannot take the excess money that is brought in and distribute it out. So how is this different and how is it same? Most people, it's pretty clear and they understand how things are different. A for-profit entity operates as a business, and the idea is to generate a profit for the people who own it, a private person who owns, or a group of people who own the for-profit. What does a for-profit entity do? They make money, their revenues are higher than their expenses. They take the excess, and then we call it a profit. They pay taxes on that, and then the rest of the profit is distributed to the owners, or it's reinvested back in the company. How do they distribute profits? If you have stock in the business, you get dividends. That's how profits are distributed. If it's not a publicly traded for-profit, then the money just goes to, whoever owns the for-profit. A nonprofit also needs to make money more than its expenses. The revenues that come in should be more than its expenses. Otherwise, it's not a going business. A nonprofit, however, on that excess pays no taxes. The other point to remember, a difference between a for-profit and a not-for-profit, is there is no one who owns a nonprofit. Why is that? Because a nonprofit can raise public funds and must be accountable and transparent in the use of the funds. So there is no owner as such. This is an important point to understand. Even if you start up a nonprofit or you're on the board of a nonprofit, it doesn't mean you're an owner. So those are the differences between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. And what's the same as a for-profit is a nonprofit must also make enough money to stay in business and accomplish the mission. Because if you don't have more money coming in than money going out, then you're not going to stay in business. The second thing, which is the same, is just like a for-profit, that business that provides products or services to the marketplace, to the community, to the populations. There are nonprofits who offer similar services as other nonprofits, and competition, which you might think of as something that only happens in the for-profit world. There's severe and significant competition from one nonprofit to another nonprofit. Hopefully this makes sense, what I've just said. I'll pause here and see, Teresa, if there are any questions.
Yeah, can a person become a permanent founder?
Uh, yes, a person can be a permanent founder, but let me elaborate on that a little bit, because how a nonprofit functions and is administered is done through a board of directors. So that's where the question of permanent may not work, but we'll talk about that.
Okay. I think the other two questions, I think you'll get to them, so I will hold on to the other two questions for a bit.
Okay, thanks. So now that you know what a nonprofit is, what are some of the things you have to keep in mind? There are four very important things for a publicly funded organization, for an NPO. The first one is you have to be absolutely transparent. And by transparent, I mean not just in terms of the activities that you carry out, but also how you get money, from who you get the money, what do you do with the money, and there are pretty significant reporting and filing requirements, both by the federal government and the state in which your nonprofit is registered. Very important. We don't have to get into the specific reporting in this. Were you to go forward, and we'll talk about in the future how you could have a meeting with me or any of my colleagues, other mentors, and we can share more about reporting and filing. The second thing that you have to do is your organization has to establish certain articles of organization and certain bylaws. These are the rules that you create, and these bylaws and articles of organization then become public documents that are then the things that drive how you act and how you behave. By you, I mean the organization. The third must category is anyone who is a highly compensated employee or an officer of the nonprofit. The salaries and any compensation they get have to be publicly reported. How do they get publicly reported? When you file the federal report and the state report, right in that filing, it's like, it looks like a tax form, but it's not a tax form, it's a public document, and you would have the name, the home address, as well as the salaries and compensation of the people at the top, people who are running the show, as well as people who are highly compensated. And the fourth important must is every nonprofit has to have a board of directors. So while I said, in a nonprofit, you can't be the owner, the board of directors are the ones that provide governance and make sure that the nonprofit is following all the rules and oversight of the operations with no financial incentives. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm going to just turn off this phone of mine that's ringing. Sorry about that. So 4 important things, you have to be public, open, make sure you understand that there are rules to be recorded and documented. Salaries and compensation has to be made public, and have a very competent board of directors. Any questions on any of these 4 points?
Yeah. For the board of directors, can you explain what governance and oversight of operation might look like?
Yes. So when you put a nonprofit together and you will define the articles of organization and the bylaws, those bylaws have to be followed and adhered to by the nonprofit, by the people who are managing the nonprofit, say the executive director of the nonprofit, or the finance people, or the marketing people. Those things, to make sure that they're doing it correctly, and not just, to avoid fraud or waste or abuse. That's what the board of directors provides the governance. Who do you bring in? How do you vet the people who become a part of the nonprofit or even join the board? So unless there was a specific area that somebody who asks this question is interested in, it's a very broad statement. It's probably the most amount of honesty ever expected out of an organization is from a nonprofit. And the board of directors, by the way, has to do this with no financial incentives, i.e., there is no compensation provided or someone who's on the board of directors. It's all pro bono work.
Are there standard boilerplate bylaws that can be used instead of creating new ones from scratch?
Yes. And actually, when you were you to get going, and let's say you want to get a score mentor, we've got documented, templates for bylaws and articles of organization. What would happen is the score mentor would sit with you, and what you would do is like tweak it. So, for example, um, a very standard bylaw has to describe how many members on the board of directors there should be. So you can have any number of members, but you would pick and insert the right number of members that you want. And the other thing is you can use the boilerplate and then tailor it to your needs.
If you're the only founder, how do you find people to be on your board of directors? People that have a similar mindset.
That is one of the biggest challenges when you get going on a nonprofit, is to make sure you do a very good job of that. Because various people on the board of directors have to play different roles. So I'll answer that question in a little bit more detail. It's really up to you at what you're offering to the community, as well as the people who are going to help make that successful, for you, what you're offering. So just hold on, I'll elaborate on that more.
And I have two questions that are the same. Everyone wants they want to know if they can be on the board of directors and an officer and get paid a salary.
The short, quick answer is yes. How that is done, I will explain it a little bit further. Yes, you can be highly compensated. You could be so somebody starts a new nonprofit, they're the one with the idea, they're the ones who really care about this whole thing. They have to run the show, and they can be the executive director and get a salary, and they also can be, say, I'll make it up a title, but you could be the chairman of the board or the chairperson of the board. But we'll talk about, there are some very specific rules relative to all of that.
Okay, last question, and then we'll go ahead and move forward. Could you please explain in detail these terms, public nonprofit and private nonprofit?
Um, Let me see. Just about 99% of even 99.59% are public nonprofits. By that I mean the nonprofit goes to individuals and organizations and ask them for funds to run, ask for grants and donations. A private nonprofit, what I meant by that, it's kind of an odd term. It's like if you were a very rich person like Warren Buffett and you decided you're going to give out money out of your own pocket and to anybody and everybody, that could well be like it's a private nonprofit, you know.
Okay, great. All right, let's keep going forward then.
Okay. So I want to emphasize what are some of the key roles that as you're putting a nonprofit together, what do you have to do? You have to have a board of directors, as I said, and at a minimum, you need to have three different people. One who is the chair of the board of directors, one who's the treasurer. The treasurer is the one who is legally, along with the chair and the other board members, are the main person who keeps an eye on what's going on with the money and the funds. And the third is some people call them a clerk, I'll call it a secretary. This is the person who keeps all the documentation and the minutes of the meeting, all the records. At a minimum, you need three members on the board of directors. I generally tell people there are a couple of other important roles also. So you should try to, if you start off a a new nonprofit with at least 5 people, um, that's very helpful because there's an activity here which you always assume that the chair and the treasurer and the executive director will spend a lot of the energies in fundraising. But if you have someone who has got a very strong network and a background in raising funds and grants, uh, that person, if they care about the mission that, someone asked a question, if the mission that you have in mind, they should be on the board of directors and they can be driving a common term that's used is the development effort. There could be in a larger nonprofit, you have an executive in the executive management besides the executive director, you have HR, you may have a development organization, and you would have a board member who coordinates everything with them. Uh, Generally, you want to have a board that consists of an odd number of people. So 3, 5, 7, 9. The reason you don't want a board to be of even number of people because you have to vote on any decision that's made. You need a vote, and you want to be able to not have necessarily a tie because it can't be that one person has the authority to break the tie. You basically have an odd number of board members, and you also have rotating or staggered terms. And that you define all of that in the bylaws, in the executive management, at the very least, you need an executive director. And when the question was asked, can someone be the chair or be on the board as well as the executive director? Yes. And as a board member, you would not get a salary, but as an executive director, you could draw a salary. And in the condition of a nonprofit, where there's the chair and the same person is also the CEO, that has to be spelled out in the bylaw that this particular position as a CEO will get a compensation of XYZ, and then the board has to vote on it, that they're going to get this annual compensation or whatever. And then, of course, another key role is the operations to deliver the services of the nonprofit. These are 4 major areas of operations: information technology, marketing. Marketing is a very broad term, digital marketing or in-person marketing, fundraising, and finance. Probably the most difficult role is fundraising. Any questions on the key roles?
Yes, we do. Can these key board of director roles be the same person? All of them be the same person?
One person be the chair, the treasurer, and secretary?
Yes.
I would not recommend that at all because then it's like a one-man band. And when you go to anybody and say, well, who's involved in this? Who's involved with the mission? Who cares about this? You'll be hard pressed to get money from people because then it's like it could be a scam.
Yeah. Okay, can your board of directors be in different states and meetings held virtually?
I would say it's possible, but unless you have a very large nonprofit, um, the initial time that the nonprofit is in existence for the first 12, 24 months, they tend to serve the community and the demographics in that same state or in the same county or in the same city. So I can't really tell you can't have um, directors from other states, but you can't have everything virtually. You can even have directors who are not in the country. You could have, you know, 7 board members, and let's say you're involved with, I don't know, with food distribution for the impoverished in Africa. You could have somebody who is from that particular African country or whatever. So the answer is yes, but it's a question of on a practical basis. How are you going to make sure that you're successful and established?
Are there different laws by state for the number of officers required, or is this pretty much standard across the?
It's pretty standard.
Okay. And someone asks, I thought the chair could be the treasurer, but the chair can't serve as secretary. Have you ever heard?
I haven't heard of that, but I would strongly suggest that the chair and the treasurer not be the same person. One of the biggest challenges nonprofits experience over time is fraud, waste, and abuse. The treasurer should be a person with a very solid financial background and should be a separate person from the chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let me move on to the next thing, money. Probably the most important thing I can talk about when it comes to a nonprofit. Um, a nonprofit should generate enough revenues to cover all the costs required to meet its mission, but also enough revenue so it can be reinvested and stay in business, stay in existence beyond 12 months. Now, what happens is because you're offering services to meet the mission of the nonprofit, these services you're trying to offer at oftentimes at no cost or just at cost. You're offering them free or you're offering them just to cover the cost that so it's minimal because if people could get the same thing by going and paying more, then they would go there. But because they don't have, they can't afford it, they'll come to the nonprofit. So revenues from the services are not always enough to cover all your costs. So, which is why you have to do fundraising from donors and get grants. It's very important to know that you have two types of revenue coming into a nonprofit. Fundraising, and second is service revenues. For a fundraising and donation standpoint, it's very important to involve donors who really care about the mission, care about what you're doing, and they are willing to do repeat donations. So foundations, for example, large foundations many times will give a 3-year grant and they'll say, okay, we are giving you $200,000 and you're going to get 100,000 in the first year, 50,000 in the second year, 50,000 in the third year. So right away, you have some assurance that you've got cash coming in for more than 1 year. So repeat donations are important from individuals as well as organizations. And in order to make sure you get these donations, this is common sense. If you've first gone to them and they've given you the money because you've explained these are the outcomes, this is what I'm helping, we are going to help make happen. You have to be able to produce results that are clear and show that because you were doing what you were doing, these outcomes were successful, and also providing timely communications. Because once the donors are kept in the loop, then you can be sure that they will continue to care about what you're doing and provide funding support. Any questions on this?
I don't think so. We can keep
Okay.
moving.
Money is very important. I am over here, I just said, there's competition. If you've come up with an idea, you shouldn't assume that the idea is so brand new, converting cameras that take pictures to telephones that take pictures, not revolutionary. Uh, you should know that there are other people offering the same services or similar services, and that's competition. I don't know how many of you know, but Massachusetts is, even though it's such a small state, There are over 6,000 nonprofits just in Massachusetts alone. And when you think about the number of nonprofits that are around in the whole country, they're in thousands and thousands. So it's important to be aware of who else is in the space where you're operating. And once you're aware of that, before you start the nonprofit, it's important to learn from them and see what you can do better. And once you go through that, and maybe those of you who are on this webinar actually are already involved and work for a nonprofit, but you think you can do something, offer XYZ, and do something you might want to spin off, it's important that you explore if there is a nonprofit who's willing to collaborate and cooperate with you. Collaboration is the right answer to any kind of competition. And what you should do is you might offer services, and we've run into this when people who come to us for mentoring, there are people who are offering certain services, say to children's organizations in certain towns, and they're offering ABC type of service. But then there is DEF type of service, which is similar, but not quite the same. And if two nonprofits got together and have synergies, and you might be able to offer both those kinds of services to the client. So, explore all of that. This is just overall advice on how you can establish yourself and operate. Hopefully this makes sense. Any questions on this?
Yeah, is there a magic ratio for how much?
Magic ratio for? Hello? Teresa? Sorry, I think we lost her. I don't know what's happened, but we'll come back to that question. This is kind of important as you're thinking about this, and this is something that when I'm mentoring somebody who is interested in nonprofit or a for-profit, it's very important to do a little inventory of your own personal strengths and gaps. What you need to think about, will your circumstances, your own personal circumstances, allow you to spend the time and energy needed to ensure that your proposed organization can get going, and after 1 or 2 or 3 years becomes an established nonprofit. So it's important to know that you can devote the time. The second thing is you should very honestly tell yourself, what are you good at? And who else do you know who would be interested in getting actively involved in the same cause? So there might be certain operational things. You might be very good at fundraising, but you probably may not understand a word of how to do effective marketing. Can you find somebody who is interested in the same mission and the cause, and you could recruit that person to join you on the board? How do you find these people? Is you start off by your own network in the community that you're at. So there was a question earlier. I hope this sort of elaborates on that for you. It's important to know what you're good at, because what you're not good at, you have to recruit and fill the expertise gap and the experience gap. And you do that by sitting down and thinking about doing your inventory. The other thing you need to be thinking about is, how do you find people and funding resources to meet your mission and to help you? Because regardless of operational or in other interests, funding is very important. People who know how to look for grant sources can write grants. And there are organizations that will also write grants for you, but then, you have to pay them to do that. And when you're starting out, you may not be able to afford to do that. And then, of course, any organization, uh, you can't do everything yourself. You have to have a team. And your job would be, as you go down the road, you have to be able to motivate the team and lead the team and to be a coach, not just a doer. And you will eventually just transition to just being the coach. You'll be coaching the key employees, you'll be coaching the board members who have joined you, and making sure that it's a tight-knit team. And the last one, of course, you have to be willing to let people make mistakes. And so they learn from that and learn to delegate. It's very difficult, once you start something new, that's your baby, but all of you, those of you who have kids, know the child is a different person. The nonprofit is a different entity from you as an individual and needs to flourish and grow on its own. I'll pause again, and Teresa, I hope
Hopefully you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Yay. Okay.
No.
Something happened. Sorry about that. How much income should be donor based versus grant based? Is there a magical ratio for that?
No, there is no magical ratio between a donor base and a grant base. However, when it comes to, there are a couple of metrics that's important to keep in mind between the revenue bring in through services versus fundraising, whether it's donor or grant. You should try to get at least 60% of your revenues through your services. The other ratio, which is important, is how much money do you, of your costs and the expenses, how much do you spend on the delivery of services versus the administration and the bureaucracy. So a well-run nonprofit would devote at least 85% of the costs would be on the services, and 15% should be the max you should spend on administration.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I still have questions, but we'll save them. They're odd.
We practically are at the end of the thing, so why don't you go ahead
Go
and
ahead.
we only have one more slide, that's all.
Okay. Can a nonprofit change its purpose and name or dissolve and then reopen a new entity?
Uh, the brief answer is yes, but it all depends on, I mean, one would have to be, it's like you can close a business and start a new business. So the brief answer is yes, but you have to be very careful.
Is there anything else other than a 990 that needs to be filed every year?
So this, assuming everybody on this call understands what a 990 is, a 990 is like a tax return for the nonprofit, a federal tax return. And there are, just like, though, if you're your own personal tax return, you have a 1040 and you have the 1040 EZ. There is a 990, which is a regular 990, and then there is the EZ 990. And the requirements of which one needs to be filed is a function of your revenues and the assets that are owned by the nonprofit. In addition to all of that, for example, in the state of Massachusetts, you also require to file a state return to the Secretary of State, and sorry, with the Attorney General's office. And so yes, that's the only other form. And probably in addition to that, the paperwork that always throws people off is that when you go for grants and foundations, you are required to report back to the donor. What did you commit to saying you were going to use it for, and what were the actuals? So there are reporting requirements put on nonprofits by the grant and foundation organizations.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about worker-driven, self-directed bylaw structure and roles for mission-driven nonprofits?
Um, I don't know what that means. It's like saying as somebody who is worker driven but is also a board member. I'm not exactly sure what that question implies. It's like, it's the kind of question that somebody would say, well, Avis is a rental company that is owned by the employees. That is a structure that for-profit companies do, but a nonprofit, I don't totally understand the question.
Okay, maybe that person can resubmit their question
Yeah.
differently. Our in quotes friends of nonprofits valid?
Oh yeah, that could be a very nice little fundraising community.
Do you know what percent of nonprofits fail?
Uh, I don't have an answer to that, but quite a few do fail.
Okay.
And they fail because they're not able to have enough money to cover their costs and deliver the services, so they shut down.
How much cash reserve should you have for a rainy day fund for a new or emerging nonprofit?
What kind of fun?
Like a cash reserve or rainy day fund. How much should you?
Oh, um, you should be able to cover your costs for at least 6 months. Um, and there are any kind of a organization, there are financial ratios. You should be looking at some of those ratios, even for a nonprofit. We actually um, when you file your tax return as well as a nonprofit, or you have an auditing firm that audits the nonprofit's financials, they will present to the board of directors certain key indicators, you know, uh, and the accountant, the CPA firm will give you what those are.
Okay. So I have questions about filing the Form PC. Somebody asked what the state board is, which is the
Yeah, the
um,
Form PC is like the state tax return, if you will.
okay. I think we can mark
But
that.
that's what it's called in Massachusetts. Other states have other names for that.
Okay. Um, in Massachusetts, what is the revenue threshold for having audited annual statements? Do you know? It used to be 500K. Is that
Um, there is no specific thing I can tell you because it's important to know that the people who want audited financials are the donors, like the foundations, grant making organizations. They want to have your current and they'll current past years financial audited financials, and or they might ask for 3 years worth of audited financials. Uh, if you're not going to anybody for money, you're just generating all the revenue right from your services. Um, you know, it's not like anybody's going to put a threshold. You do have to file audited financials for your 990s.
Here's a great question. When starting small and very limited, are the parameters you presented, example, the board of directors, more of an ideal to shoot for in a certain amount of time, or should all of this be set up before you even get started, no matter how small you are?
All of it should be set up before you start, no matter how small you are.
Okay. What do you see as the pros and cons of starting a nonprofit versus remaining unincorporated, but pursuing a fiscal sponsorship with another nonprofit whose mission is aligned with what you do?
Um, so it's a very good question. It's a little bit of a detailed question. Most uh, people, when they start off a nonprofit, they to go through the whole registration process and setting up a bank account and all that, to add on administrative overhead, They may not do all the financial accounting and record keeping themselves. They will start off by saying, asking someone else who's already in business as being their fiscal sponsor. So the fiscal sponsor keeps all the records and also gets all money coming in. What this does is um, gives you time because the IRS, in order to file and establish a publicly traded nonprofit, you're establishing what's called a 501c3. By the time you get permission to have a 501c3 with your own tax ID number and all that, that could take 12 months or could even take even longer these days. Um, During the time, you say, okay, I want to get going. I want to deliver my mission. I've got my board ready and we're ready to start doing things. And I want to raise money. So what you can do is have the fundraising being done and the money goes to the fiscal sponsor who keeps the information and the money separately, only to be accessed by your nonprofit till such time as you get a 501c3 designation by the IRS. So absolutely, that's perfectly fine. That's actually a path a lot of people take. The fiscal sponsor may not do it for free. There might be a small percentage, and that'll be part of your expenses anyway. You know, so I hope that answers the question.
Do you think a nonprofit can be successful if they are non-cash based, where everything is donated, including labor?
Um, I have not heard of anything like that, but I don't see why not. Because when you do your reporting, you have to report your cash donations as well as your non-cash donations. So I, it's unusual, but I don't see why it wouldn't be successful.
What should a nonprofit use for a budget format?
Budget format, it should just be able to project out your cash from revenues, whether it is from operations or um, uh, donations, grants, and uh, you know, individual donations, and then the costs. You should have your major areas of costs identified. If you're providing for any of the services or physical stuff, or if you have um, inventory that you have to buy that you're also providing. So, the format is pretty straightforward. You should engage. There are small accounting firms that will do accounting for nonprofits, and they can break that out. It's really no different from the accounting and the bookkeeping that you do for a for-profit.
Okay, we're down to the last two questions. Can an LLC doing business as be a nonprofit organization?
And an LLC, you mean?
An LLC, yeah.
Uh, yeah, they can, but normally when you go to the Secretary of State's office and you register a nonprofit, you register it as a corporation and you say it's a nonprofit. None of this, the doing business as is all, those are things that people pursue when they're for-profit organizations.
Okay. Last question. What is the greatest lesson or takeaway you've learned from running a nonprofit?
So I have been involved with nonprofits for quite a while. I think the greatest lesson is really making sure that you don't have all your expenses expanding so fast that you're not able to generate enough revenues to make that happen. The biggest problem people run into is they've got a budget and they've got things laid out. This is what we're going to do, and they're delivering services, and people just love them. But then, there's not enough money coming in. A lot of nonprofits experiences during the pandemic. It's a very sad state of affairs, and I and I hate to say this, I'm not a projector of doom and gloom. A lot of nonprofits who rely on federal grants or on state grants, where the state is relying on federal grants, they are going through a lot of turmoil right now. And I think I could be wrong. The turmoil is going to get worse. I'm sorry, I don't mean to end on, I hate to end on a note like that.
Well, um, yeah, go
I
ahead.
do have my last slide. I'm sorry, I should show this if you don't mind, Teresa.
Yeah.
What I would suggest, and this is just gather your thoughts and write out your answers to what you've learned today. And then what I would suggest is you can just go on our website, um, and Teresa is also our intake manager, and she'd be happy to connect you with a member of the nonprofit practice group, and everything is free. And you can talk more in depth with either myself or with any of the other nonprofit group people.
Yep. And I just put my email address into the chat. And then here is um, a link to the mentor request page as well. It does say for Boston, but if you do there on that page is, putting your zip code in, it will direct you to another chapter. So that's not an issue either. But yeah, okay. Well, I think that we've covered everything. Ramesh, that was fantastic as always. Lots of fantastic information. We look forward to seeing everyone at the grant writing part two for nonprofits. I did put that link in the chat earlier. That's on May 8th. You can also find that on our website as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for attending. Bye.
Bye.